Good morning and welcome to PDT 2021. I'm Ann Eberts, AGA's CEO. On behalf of AGA, I'm excited to welcome you to our second 100% virtual PDT event. We hope that all of you, and that's nearly 2,500 of you, will enjoy this year's program and take advantage of the high quality learning and engagement opportunities over the next 3 days. Okay, now it's time to get things started. We're ready to start our program. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Gene Dodaro, Comptroller General of the United States. Mr. Dodaro became the 8th Comptroller General of the U.S. and head of the U.S. Government Accountability Office on December 22nd, 2010, when he was confirmed by the United States Senate. He's testified before Congress dozens of times, and I'll admit I'm kind of a geek and I like to watch this. And he's including the nation's long-term fiscal outlook, improving the Pentagon's business practices, reducing and eliminating overlap in federal government, and also providing a status update on GAO's high-risk list. As Comptroller General, Mr. Dodaro oversees the development and issuance of hundreds of reports and testimonies to various committees and members of Congress. These and other GAO statements have led to hearings and legislation, billions of dollars in taxpayer savings, and improvements in a wide range of programs. Mr. Dodaro is a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration, and I think most importantly, an AGA member. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me or join me in welcoming Gene Dodaro. Well, good morning, Gene.
Good morning, Ann, and everyone attending the session. Good day to all of you.
So we do have several questions for you today. So we're going to wake everybody up with finding out what's going on with GAO. I understand this is a really big year for you all. So talk to us about how GAO has transformed since its establishment 100 years ago, which is kind of an amazing number.
GAO's history is one of dynamic change. We've continued to evolve to meet the needs of the Congress and the country as they've changed over time, both domestically and internationally. When GAO was first formed in 1921, it was done largely as a result of trying to impose a better fiscal discipline on our government. It set up a budgeting process for the first time, created the Office of Management and Budget's predecessor, the Bureau of the Budget at that time, to have a better process in the executive branch. And then it formed GAO out of parts of the Treasury Department and placed it in the legislative branch to do independent checking on the payments of government. Then as government grew over time, by World War II, we had devolved that responsibility to the executive branch agencies, began to do more comprehensive financial auditing, which we still do today. But as government grew during the 50s with the Great Society programs, following on from the Depression, expansion of federal activities, we evolved more to focus on programs and activities and do performance audits, of which we're known for today. And that's about 90% of our portfolio is on performance audits, although we still audit the consolidated financial statements of the federal government. And then in the 80s, Ann, we developed a focus on more management issues, looking at entire departments and agencies. In the 90s, we created the high-risk list to focus on transformation and the need to more systematically address management issues across the government. And then we've added to that a lot of experts over time. Of course, during the recession, the Great Recession and the global financial crisis, and now with COVID-19, we've introduced more real-time auditing, which has added another dimension to our skills. We've focused a lot on establishing and doing more foresight work, alerting Congress to upcoming challenges and programs and issues that they need to address. And then the international area, we've always been involved in setting professional standards, both auditing and internal controls. But now we've established an audit center for excellence where we're providing technical support and help and more hands-on assistance to auditors around the world and domestically here with state and local auditors as well as inspector generals. So it's been one of change. We're still changing. We've created a new science and technology group now. We're focused more on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and this is part of the ever-changing GAO to best meet the needs of the Congress and the country, both now and into the foreseeable future.
No, that's excellent. And we also have a session later today on your artificial intelligence framework. So we're very excited about that. Are there other, what would you say is the most notable accomplishment? What are you most proud of in that?
Well,
and I would say not in the last 100 years, maybe in your term.
Well, I'm almost half of the 100, and so I'm very proud of GAO's record of achieving on a regular basis great outcomes for the Congress and the American people. Since 2000, over 77% of our recommendations get implemented on a fairly regular basis, and that's resulted in over $1.2 trillion in financial benefits to the government, over 25,000 improvements in public safety and public programs and activities over time. We've risen to the national emergencies and challenges, both in the global financial crisis with trying to help ensure the success of the program to provide assistance to our financial institutions and get our economy back on its feet, the Recovery Act, and now COVID-19, we're playing a key role. So I'm very proud of the way GAO rises to the occasion to meet these national emergencies, whether they're just domestic or global in a lot of cases. We've continued to issue our fiscal health reports to advise the Congress on the fiscal condition of the federal government, as you well know. I'm very proud of those reports and our call for change in that area. Our high-risk program has resulted in tremendous achievements. We've saved over $500 billion in the last 15 years and through that program and activity. It's led to improvements, so we have better weather satellites now to help us with extreme weather events and to alert people. It's led to improvements in intelligence sharing after 9/11. So we're in a stronger position to deal with terrorist threats and activities. It's led to cybersecurity legislation that's been put in place to try to help the government deal with that very serious threat to our country. Our overlap and duplication work has led to over $429 billion in financial benefits. And I think we're moving steadily toward $500 billion in that effort as well. Our legal work's also very important. I'm very proud of our work to protect Congress's power of the purse. Impoundment control decisions, whether it's withholding of foreign aid or whether it's, providing funds for domestic challenges such as the border wall and other areas. And we issue regularly, handle over 2,500 bid protests every year, which is an amazing record, and never have missed the timeline in that area as well. And we're given a lot of expert advice in appropriation law and assistance. And then lastly, I'm very proud of our record of best places to work in the federal government. We've been in the best places to work since 2005 when it was first formulated. This past year, I'm very proud on our 100th anniversary, we actually achieved #1 ranking in mid-sized agencies for the first time. So I'm very proud of the GAO people and the dedicated workforce we've had and the tremendous public servants that we've been blessed with in GAO over the years, past and present.
Yeah, thank you for your leadership. It's amazing how much you all accomplished with a relatively small agency. I mean,
I'm trying to grow it, Ann, but it's tough sledding. It's tough sledding.
So talking about the workforce, we can't move forward actually with a discussion without talking about the pandemic and our people. And you all had prepared, you had a pre-pandemic telework infrastructure that helped your organization continue to be successful and make a relatively, I guess, smooth transition to remote work during the pandemic. So how have you managed the people aspect of remote work, particularly the onboarding, remaining connected and kind of maintaining your culture?
Yes. Well, as you mentioned, we were able to make a fairly easy move to 100% telework. We allowed people to work up to 66 hours out of every 80-hour work period in a remote environment pre-pandemic. So we were well postured for that, except in the classified work area. That posed significant challenges, and that had to be paused for a time. We're back, and have been for a while, back doing that work on site and using the proper protections. But nothing prepared us for the impact that was going to occur on our people. So
right.
I spent every day focused on how to help them accommodate the challenges that faced them, both professionally but personally as well. So we extended our work hours so that broader portion of the day to give them flexibility. To include Saturday time. We didn't do Sunday because it's, for a wide variety of reasons, not the least of which you have to pay overtime. Being the frugal GAO we don't want to go there, but there are other reasons. Right. And we gave people administrative leave of 20 hours every 2-week period for caregiving.
Oh, wow.
A lot of people had child care issues. There were people and their family members that needed help. Some people got ill themselves. So whatever challenges they had, we gave them some flexibility to do that. And we actually found that people worked more during the period because they didn't go on annual leave. So even though they had this administrative leave, there were more hours charged to work than there was before the pandemic. So we didn't really lose a beat in the work that we've done. We also had wellness initiatives. I noticed you mentioned AGAs in your opening introduction, but we developed a whole program. We have a website on wellness. We also have a first-rate counseling center. So if people had issues they wanted to talk to somebody about, a professional trained, they had the access to that as well. So I care for our people at GAO like I care for my own family, and we really worked hard to create a good environment that everybody could adjust and flourish in a very difficult set of circumstances.
So we have a polling question. So we want to hear from the audience what the top challenge was that you faced while operating in a virtual environment. So we'll give you guys a couple of seconds to respond, and then we'll have Gene respond to what your top challenge was. Okay, we've got results coming in. Okay, while they keep coming in, I think the big one, Gene, is maintaining culture of creativity and teamwork. So how did GAO work through that?
Well, first of all, make sure we have good teamwork. We regularly held town hall meetings, and in these town hall meetings, I could reach, the several thousand people in GAO. Regularly, about 2,400 people would attend. We'd record them. People could hear it later. So we kept people up to date. A big challenge here of teamwork is good communication. and regular communication to put people at ease. You can't have people be creative and not have teamwork if they have so many questions that preoccupy them. And so getting good communication out and teamwork. And then all of our teams created new and exciting opportunities. Also, in GAO, we were presented with a new opportunity to do real-time auditing on the trillions of dollars spent on the coronavirus issue. And we had to provide monthly briefings to the Congress, report bi-monthly to the public. And so this caused us to, put all our creative talents to use to help the country in this period of time. So we had a rallying point with that, as well as carrying out our normal work and our activities. And also it was important, I see the second issue is onboarding new staff. Mm-hmm. You need to have a sense of normality, even in abnormal situations. And so initially, some of our people wanted to pause hiring new people. And I said, no, we have to, this is a good time, for government, unfortunately for the country, when we have economic challenges, but for the government, it's a good competitive advantage. We have very few competitive advantages. And so I wanted to make sure we did. So we virtually onboarded literally hundreds of people in GAO during this period of time, both regular employees, full-time, as well as interns, to keep that going. Of course, new people bring new ideas and a sense of creativity.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, your workload went up too, so it's a good thing you were able to onboard and to bring more people on. That's awesome. So since our last PDT, can't believe that was a full 12 months ago. Time does fly while you're busy. We discussed some of GAO's new responsibilities associated with the CARES Act. There's several layers of oversight in play. You've got GAO, department IGs, not high risk yet, Jerome. Several IGs, the PRAC, state IGs, and probably others. Can you give an update on GAO work and how GAO has been able to share knowledge and experience related to the pandemic oversight with others in the accountability community?
Sure, Ann. As I mentioned, we've been reporting every 2 months, starting in June 2020, on our reports on the oversight of the coronavirus funding. Our challenge given to us by the Congress was to report the use of the funds and the impact it was having on public health and on dealing with the economic repercussions. We've made 72 recommendations so far. Today, we'll be releasing our latest report, which will have 15 new recommendations in there. We're calling on, for example, the CDC to develop a long-term better plan for surge laboratory testing capabilities, the creation of diagnostic kits, perhaps putting advanced contracts in place to deal with these issues going forward. Last September, we called for a national vaccine communication and distribution plan. Unfortunately, that was slow to come, and I still think we see the consequences from not getting on that earlier in the process. And so I think we've made some very impactful recommendations, many of which have been implemented, many others are underway. In addition to these 7 comprehensive government-wide reports, we've issued over 30 individual reports on individual areas. For example, on the vaccine development, we actually did technology readiness assessments of the vaccines that have been underway and assessed them against that criteria. We've done, 18 congressional testimonies and other issues. Now, working with the PRAC and the state and local auditors, we got on that right away. I talked to Michael Horowitz soon after the CARES Act was passed last March 2020. We got up and running. We meet regularly with them. I helped organize regular monthly meetings with the state and local auditors, as well as the PRAC, the IG community. So the whole IG community and the whole accountability community on the audit side has been well organized since the beginning of this. You know, we did this during the Recovery Act days and the global financial crisis. We were able to resurrect that model that we've had. And of course, we always have good regular communication through the intergovernmental audit forums and other matters. So that is an ongoing thing, but during these special events, we ramp it up. And so I'm very pleased with that. All our reports are fed into the PRAC website for the CARES Act reports. And we're working with the state and local auditors. Recently, we held a meeting to focus on identity verification, for example, which has come up to be a big issue as they've been focused, and we have, on a lot of the fraud that unfortunately has occurred in some of these programs, unemployment insurance, paycheck protection program, the economic injury disaster loan program. And so it's been quite a challenge for the accountability community, but I'm proud of we responded and have made very important contributions working together.
It's hard to, I think, for most people to get their head around how big the funding, the additional money into the economy has been. I remember I was talking with Michael Horowitz, and he had said something. He said, "Ann, if there's only 0.5% of fraud," he said that amount would, because I said, well, there's bound to be a lot of fraud. And he said, if there's only 0.5% amount of fraud, that would fund all of Department of Justice for a year. So when you think about, we know there's more than 0.5% of fraud. I mean, it's bound to happen, and that's been identified already, but it's just a little mind boggling to put your head around those kind of numbers. For the normal American citizen that's not in the middle of government.
No, it is. And I think there's some very important lessons learned out of this activity that can better prepare us for the future in that regard. Actually, I thought, our record in the Recovery Act was very good at minimizing fraud. In this case, it was so broad-based.
And fast.
And fast and huge with the amounts of money. And that, unfortunately, it wasn't able to be as well managed. And we've made a lot of recommendations to improve transparency, oversight, and accountability in this area. And so it's but the one thing I tried to encourage that both the administration and the Congress, coming out of the Recovery Act, there was a Recovery Operations Center. And that was set up by the IGs, it performed very well and helped stem a lot of fraud in the Recovery Act. But once that wound down, Treasury had the ability to take that on and make it a more permanent thing. And they decided not to do that because their view was they weren't a law enforcement entity in that regard. And I encouraged the Congress to fund the IGs to continue that program, but that didn't happen. So now, a few years later, we're back in this issue. We have to recreate something like that. And so I'm hoping one of the lessons learned out of this is that we need to have that as an ongoing function. Right. And we can scale it up and down appropriately, but we need to have that. And there's a lot more that could be done on identity verification, on checking on people before contracts are let. But in any event, I hope we do better in the future.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is our risks and on how money is being used. Can you talk about the 2021 high risk list that was updated earlier this year and explain the importance of the high risk list, and tell us about any new areas that have been added to it since 2019? Because I think you do this every other year, correct?
Right. And so we do it with the beginning of each new Congress. And that also coincides with, the terms for the various administrations. And the list has always been helpful as presidents set their management agendas as well, which is one of the important areas. These are what we consider to be the highest risk across the federal government. for fraud, waste, abuse, mismanagement, or in need of broad-based transformation. This latest update that we did here in 2021, we reported there were 5 areas unfortunately regressed. 7 showed a lot of progress. We rate these agencies on 5 criteria: leadership, commitment, having the capacity, the people, and the skills, having a good action plan, monitoring progress, and then demonstrating some results. So that's what, we showed 7 made progress. 1 enough to be removed from the list completely, which was the defense support and infrastructure management. They reduced the number of facilities. They reduced their leasing costs. They implemented all the recommendations we've made about base closure issues in the event of another base closure round. So we're well prepared and made a lot of contributions to the government-wide reduction in the federal footprint and costs associated with that. We added 2 new areas. One, coming out of the pandemic, was the SBA emergency loan programs. We found the SBA did a very good job of getting the money out quickly. Unfortunately, that didn't make very quick mid-course corrections that we recommended in order to better manage those programs, both from a transparency and accountability standpoint. And as I mentioned, there have been fraud in both of the PPP and the EIDL program. Also the independent financial auditors for SBA were unable to give an opinion on their financial statements because they couldn't document properly their account balances. So I was concerned about that as well. Also, the area of drug misuse. We identified that actually in 2020 and announced our intent to add it in 2021. I didn't do it earlier out of cycle because of the pandemic. But this is an area, unfortunately, from 2002 to 2019, 800,000 people died from a drug overdose in the United States. CDC just announced within the last week or so that 2020 was the deadliest year on history, of over 93,000 people dying from a drug overdose. The federal efforts need greater coordination. We need better national leadership. We need to coordinate at federal, state, and local levels with healthcare providers, law enforcement officials, and others. This is it's plagued our country for decades. It's just a matter of drug of choice. We need to get a better handle on this issue going forward. So I wanted to raise the profile. I wanted to raise the risk of this area. And so that's pretty much the update. What I was concerned about, though, too, Ann, is that, while we had some areas progressed, some regressed, in addition to the ones that regressed, many of the other agencies hadn't made much progress in addressing the high-risk issues. And so I'm working with the new administration. We're going to resume having meetings with every area on the high-risk list with OMB and GAO, and hopefully make greater progress in the future. But because we're not addressing these problems, we're foregoing saving billions of dollars, improving services to the public, and not helping build trust and confidence in government because these problems continue.
So with oversight of funds for emergency loans and small businesses needed due to risks of fraud, what approach are you all taking regarding fraud and identifying potential fraud?
Yeah, well, we've been focused on this for a while pre-pandemic. We developed the federal fraud framework, which was set in law in 2015 in the Data Analytics and Fraud Reduction Act. So we have been working with the executive agencies to assess how well they've implemented the federal fraud framework that was ingrained in this legislative requirement for them to prevent fraud up front. So we're continuing to assess that. And agencies need to adapt that framework when they have these new emergency spending. So what we found at SBA, for example, and have recommended, was that they do a fraud risk assessment. Now you can't and use more data analytics to identify patterns of potential abuse that have occurred. So we've been focused a lot on this issue. Now you can't do the full-blown things, but if you had done that earlier for your regular programs, and if they scale up, the risk scales up. We've also been exhorting the executive branch agencies to have better internal control assessments during disaster loans that occur on a fairly regular basis, unfortunately, programs, and they've been reluctant to do that, figuring the controls that they had in place earlier were going to suffice. But our view is when you scale up funding like that and you move things out quickly, or in the case of the pandemic, you start new programs out of whole cloth, you need to have a fraud assessment as part of that effort. There was too much reliance in this case on self-certifications, for example. There could have been some better, minimum checks in place to make sure, because, there unfortunately are lots of people, both domestically now and internationally, with the abilities of computers and telecommunications to exploit these opportunities. I used to have greater faith in humankind before I took this job, but people, these type of situations bring out the best in people, like our healthcare providers and medical professionals and others who have just done a tremendous job here. But it brings out the worst in human nature, with people wanting to exploit this for personal gain, and they do, and they're very creative. And you that's going to occur, so you need to take measures to address it as best you can. And some measures can be taken that won't delay the response that's needed.
Well, I think we'd be remiss, as we talk about all the money, the stimulus and the CARES funding, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the federal deficit. A lot of money, as you just mentioned, has been thrown into the economy since March 2020. So what have you all recommended be put in place to sustain a long-term fiscal path? Because neither you or I have enough grandchildren yet to start contributing and paying taxes to build up our coffers again.
Yeah, well, our national debt as it stands now is over about $28.5 trillion. And the assistance that we provided was necessary to deal with public health assistance and to get our economy back up and running. What we recommended earlier this year was that when we did our fiscal health report, is that as soon as we achieve our public health objectives and the economy is back in a stable, growing fashion, that we quickly pivot to having a long-term plan to deal with our deficit and debt situations. So I recommended that before. I recognized in this year's report we had extraordinary circumstances that needed to be dealt with, but we quickly need to develop a plan. Some of our major programs, the Medicare Part A program, we only have enough money, the latest estimates, by 2026 to pay 87 cents on the dollar. By 2034, Social Security, we only have 75 cents to pay on the dollar. So we have some relatively near-term big decisions to make about some of the most important programs of our government. So we need to get our fiscal footing as we go forward. We're fortunate now that the interest rates are low, but that's going to change. I'm old enough to remember during the 70s when we had double-digit inflation, and so it's important to be better prepared so that we could deal with future emergencies as well. And so we've outlined what that plan should do, and we think the plan ought to have some fiscal targets. For example, a debt to GDP ratio. It ought to be embedded in law. It ought to be ingrained in our appropriation and budgetary processes on the Hill. It ought to have an independent check on whether we're making our goals or not. And this needs to be a long-term plan. We can't address these issues overnight, but we need to stay on track. The plan has to have some flexibility in case there are national emergencies that need to be dealt with. And so we outlined the characteristics of what a good plan would involve. And the other thing is I keep pressing that we change how we deal with this debt limit issue. You know, the current approach, which now it's in the back of the news now, it's set to expire at the end of this month, which means the debt then will be set at whatever we've had to borrow during this period of time. But unless the Congress raises the limit, Treasury won't be able to borrow the money necessary to pay the debts that the Congress has already appropriated and the president signed into law. This makes markets nervous. They want a higher premium to lend the government money, and it disrupts the secondary market in treasuries. We can ill afford this during a fragile economic recovery. Now we're starting to get back on a good track, and we can't afford any setbacks. So we've made suggestions on alternatives that would better set a limit for borrowing at the time we make decisions about our spending and have revenue estimates up front. Right now, this process is divorced from the decision making, does nothing to control the debt, and has all these risks that I've outlined. And so I'm hopeful at some point we'll change that limit, that approach. That's very concerning to me. And we never want to do anything to jeopardize the full faith and credit of the federal government. I mean, we're borrowing enormous amounts of money, and we can't have people lose confidence in our ability to timely repay. That would just be disastrous.
No, thank you. We've got two other topics we want to get to. I don't think we could have a conversation together without talking about cybersecurity. And, you know, certainly there's been an awful lot in the media about cybersecurity or cyber attacks. So our nation's critical infrastructure depends on information security to operate and process essential data. Given recent events, the Georgia pipeline, which my husband ended up waiting in long lines for gas during that. So that hit us all very close to home in the Washington, D.C. area. It impacted a lot of people in this area and up and down the coast. And we keep hearing about other ransomware issues. So how can you highlight the major cybersecurity challenges GAO has identified and some actions that can be implemented to address these challenges?
Absolutely. And I've long been concerned about cybersecurity issues. And I first designated it a high-risk area across the entire federal government in 1997. In 2003, we added critical infrastructure protection, protect things like the pipeline, our electricity grid, our financial markets. We've made thousands of recommendations over the years. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the legislation that's passed to improve the federal government's activities. That we've made recommendations for 10 things. I'm not going to go over them all right now, but I'll hit the highlights quickly in 4 different areas. One, we need a comprehensive national and global cybersecurity effort in the United States. There have been some plans that have been developed. They haven't met all the characteristics of a desirable national strategy. But we need some global norms. There's some that have been developed in these areas, but we need enforcement and more robust global efforts as well as national efforts. We need to address IT supply chain issues. We issued a report before the pipeline issue occurred showing that none of the 23 agencies we looked at the civilian side had implemented all 7 foundational practices to protect their IT supply chains. So we need to better respond to cyber incidents. We need to have a workforce to address the workforce issues, and this plan needs to address emerging technologies. And artificial intelligence and quantum computing are going to make this problem more difficult. Now, they'll offer some solutions too, but they'll make the problem more difficult, not less difficult going forward. So we need to ramp up. You know, I've been emphasizing, I don't think the government's operating at a pace commensurate with the evolving grave threats that we have now and in the foreseeable future. So we've encouraged federal agencies to have better cyber response incidents, to move quickly, to assess it, move well. The other areas in the private sector, you know, 80% of the assets in computing are in the private sector. And the government really doesn't have a good enough knowledge about the readiness of the private sector. And in some areas, the government has regulatory authority to set standards, but they're mostly voluntary standards. So we need more information sharing. I've been concerned that the cybersecurity area reminds me a little bit of pre-9/11, where you had pockets of intelligence, but it wasn't being shared across the areas that needed to. And that right now we're in that situation, I believe, in the cyber area. So there needs to be more public private partnerships to deal with this issue and information sharing. And then, go ahead.
No,
go ahead. No, lastly, I would just say we need a privacy framework for the private sector. We've been calling for this since 2013, and particularly for information sharing.
So how can how can the federal government best assist cities and states with cyber issues? Because it certainly is not just a federal problem. It's, as we've seen, it's a local community problem as well.
Right. Well, first of all, you need to have better national leadership in this area. That's one reason we recommended that the Congress create a statutory position in the White House for a national cybersecurity director, which Congress did last December. The position's now been filled with an individual, so that's important. Secondly, and that person needs to work with the private sector and government sectors in order to implement a good strategy. The Cyber Information Security Agency, CISA, within DHS is very important, and they have a number of outreach activities that they work with the state and local governments on. For example, most recently in election security. And our work found that a lot of the state and local officials appreciated what CISA did to help them prepare and safeguard the election process. CISA will offer to do vulnerability assessments, readiness assessments, maturity level assessments, and others to help at the state and local level. The federal government could also better coordinate its demands on the state and local sector. We issued a report, for example, talking about 5 agencies that set cybersecurity requirements for their information that they share with the state and local governments, and they don't really coordinate with one another. And as a result, the states are spending time duplicating, meeting the needs of the federal agencies when it could be more streamlined so they could spend their time in other areas of vulnerability. So there's a lot that could be done in this area, and the state and local governments don't have the same type of resources available in all cases that the federal government obviously has. And so those are some of the things that can be done, and then they can obviously help when there is an incident. There's the law enforcement efforts, both of the FBI, Secret Service, and others, as well as CISA, that can assist state and local governments if there is a penetration.
So thank you, Gene. Speaking of collaboration, which it seems like you all do an awful lot of, which I think is so beneficial to government. GAO recently published a report on AI, artificial intelligence governance, which brought together experts spanning federal industry, nonprofit sectors, and included data from interviews with subject matter experts in private companies, as well as state and local audit associations and international organizations. So, tell us about, what else are you doing for this to collaborate in these areas?
Yeah. Well, we have extensive efforts to do this, both domestically and internationally. The artificial intelligence one is just the latest in a series of examples where we've collaborated with entities. We recently published an agile development guide, a technology readiness assessment guide, cost and schedule guides. And these involve extensive network of both the public and private sectors, industry people, experts in academia, and others to prepare the best research thinking on these areas, which we were able to do in the AI, as you'll hear later, on governance issues and data issues and performance and monitoring. And this is the way our profession is heading. It's not only how we audit that's changing, but what we audit and how we can be most helpful to the country in an age where science and technology is evolving faster than any point in human history. And so we need to be prepared as a profession to deal with these issues. So we have established what we call Polaris Council of Advisors in the science and technology area. Internationally, and I set up a COVID-19 lessons learned effort among national audit officers around the world. We developed a plan. We met recently with 30 international organizations to talk about this, including United Nations and the World Bank, and others have been participating in this effort because these challenges weren't just here, they were everywhere. Right. And we need the help. And I've set up some arrangements through an international organization to get some funding to national audit offices who weren't prepared with IT structures to work remotely and needed help. Otherwise, they weren't going to be able to function during that period of time. So our collaboration continues. It's a very important part of GAO's role to convene people to discuss these issues and to put forward guides and information that can help people be successful. It's a way we can reach and have an impact without doing any particular audit. Right. And it's very powerful.
No, that's great. Thank you. We have another slide, and we do have a session later on today on artificial intelligence governance. So as a teaser to our session later this afternoon, are there a couple of highlights that you can share with us? And I love the new graphics on the report. And I will say, if anybody hasn't looked at some of the GAO reports, there's always a one-pager that does, a great synopsis. And to me, they're always great teasers for jumping into the rest of the, kind of diving into the rest of the reports. But can you talk a little bit about this? We have just a couple of minutes left.
Sure. Yeah, this slide depicts the guides that I was just referring to. In the artificial intelligence area, a key issue here are the algorithms that are used fair, that they don't have bias in them, that they're based on good information. Just because it's artificial intelligence doesn't mean that it's necessarily correct. We're looking at this issue in the law enforcement area, for example, in DNA testing used for forensics. We're going to be looking at this issue in healthcare issues. This is artificial intelligence has been and will continue to be used, and it will be effective. We've done technology assessments on how artificial intelligence, for example, can help expedite development of new drugs, how it could be used in medical diagnostics. We're doing an effort now on treatment programs, and we're looking at a number of applications and infectious disease modeling, for example, and other issues in the science and technology area. So, but it's only going to be as good as the data that's used. It's only going to be as good as where there's an intersection between people and data and decisions that are made. This is why you have the governance structure. You need to monitor performance, and you need to have good evaluation. So it's a tremendous opportunity for government and the world. to use these type of tools, but they have to be done in a manner that ensures proper transparency, proper accountability, just like any other tool that we choose to implement programs or activities. So we're trying to get ahead of this and be at the vanguard to try to establish, okay, how should we assess the performance and accountability of these type of tools that are used and move forward. Now, we'll, like all our guides, we will learn lessons from this. We'll keep them updated. We'll improve them as we go forward with experience, but it's an important first step for GAO and for the accountability community.
Thank you, and appreciate all that you do to harness the power and the knowledge and background of all the folks at GAO to move us forward and put something out there that we can all leverage and use and then kind of continue to improve on together. So thank you, Gene, as always. It's so good to see you. We were talking earlier before we got online that you have a new grandbaby. I have a new grandbaby, so we're doing our best to keep the population going and to have potentially new government folks working with us in the future. So again, thanks so much, Gene. Really appreciate all that you do and for your leadership of GAO.
Thank you, Ann. It's always a pleasure to be with you and the AGA crowd. Thank you all very much. Everybody have a nice day. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Gene. You too.